The way we breathe changes our facial structure, and our facial structure changes our immune health. It changes our ability to recover and rest and repair and sleep. All of those things are predicated on something as simple as placing our tongue correctly in the roof of our mouth and breathing in and out through our nose. I mean, how much simpler can it possibly get? They say the eyes are the window into the soul. The breath is a window into the state of somebody's nervous system.
Welcome to The Trusted Pharmacist, where you'll learn the truth about how the body works. Welcome back to The Trusted Pharmacist, where we pull back the curtain on how the body really works and empowers you to take control of your health. Today's episode is a bit of a curveball because we're talking about something that I used to completely write off, and that's breathwork. Honestly, I thought it was just a wellness buzzword, but after experiencing it firsthand and attending a mind-blowing session with today's guest at IFM this year, I realized that I was all wrong. Breathwork is powerful, physiological, and foundational. So I wanted to bring on the man who helped me change my thinking, and that's Dr. Sachin Patel. Sachin Patel is a father, husband, philanthropist, functional medicine practice success coach, speaker, author, breathwork facilitator, and plant medicine advocate. Dr. Patel is a true pioneer in functional and the lifestyle medicine space. He's a breathwork expert, chiropractor, and founder of the Living Proof Institute, where he helps people unlock their innate healing power through conscious breathing and self-awareness. Sachin's mission is powerful, but simple. It's to help people become their own best doctor. He's coached thousands around the world, blending ancient practice with modern science to treat root cause of disease, not just the symptoms. At this year's IFM conference, his standing room only breathwork session caught my captivation, but delivered many aha moments showing how something as simple as breathwork can reshape your physiology, enhance your emotional resilience, and even impact your relationship and lifespan. If you've ever wondered how to take control of your nervous system, improve your sleep, or support your kids' health without a prescription, this conversation is the one you've been waiting on. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
Steve, it's an honor. It's a pleasure. And please call me Sachin. Thank you.
Oh, got it, Sachin. I'll definitely do that. That's fabulous. Thank you so very much. Kind of just jumping in, you brought up so many ways that breath can affect how we live. And I'll tell you, one of the big things for me right now is people are coming in trying to lose weight, not the kind of the compound GLP-1 market 108. People want to lose weight. We kind of mentioned something earlier. What's kind of a powerful way that breathing has an impact in terms of weight loss or how it affects weight loss?
Yeah, in our practice, we see a lot of people struggling with metabolic dysfunction. And the thing that we do that's absolutely crucial to our metabolic function is breathing. In fact, I like to look at interventions in relationship to how long we can't live without them. You could not eat for a few weeks, probably a month or two for some people. You could not drink any water for a few days, probably up to a week. You cannot sleep for a couple of days, and that's kind of where the line ends. But something like breathing, you can't stop breathing. If you stop breathing for more than 4 or 5 minutes, you're in pretty big trouble. So that should tell us right there how important it is. And one of the things that I learned, fairly recent in the last 5 years, and I feel like I should have learned when we learned about physiology, is the power of breathing. In fact, for anyone who's interested in losing weight, for example, for every 10 pounds that we lose, 8.4 of those are through the lungs, because a byproduct of cellular respiration is CO2 and water. So we breathe out the CO2, and the water we sweat or we urinate, or some of it we actually even breathe out as well because there's moisture in our breath. So the majority of the weight that we lose, we actually exhale it. So that in and of itself should give us some clues into how important breathing is at regulating metabolic function. And then when we start realizing that the breath is an adaptogen and it's a two-way street, we start realizing we have far more control over our physiology than we might think. And somebody who is breathing too much, like the majority of the population are overbreathers. And overbreathers, as we'll probably break down by the end of this conversation, are often overeaters. And so there's a direct correlation between how much we breathe and how much food we intake and how well we digest that food. All of it, believe it or not, is connected to your breath. And the breath is almost like when you understand how to breathe correctly, it's almost like you have a panel that you would have in an elevator at your disposal. If you want to go to the 12th floor, you press this button or, / breathe this way. If you want to go to the basement or the parking garage, press this button by breathing this way. So it is a very reliable and predictable modality that every single one of us has at our disposal. And I hope that our conversation today inspires people to just have a little bit more awareness around their breath, and that will change their life for the rest of their life. It's really quite dramatic. I know that statement, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah, and that's awesome because it's one of those things. This is one of the few things in our body that's not only an automatic process, but also something we control. And that part, I think, like you said, is the powerful. I know you've said breath is the most powerful health technology you've never heard of. What sparked your journey into the world of breathwork, and how does it change your approach to healing with patients?
Yeah, it's a great question. As chiropractors, we're heavily focused on the nervous system, and we're focused on what interferes with healthy nervous system function. And a lot of times that's associated with, physical disruptions, right? So it could be, a joint isn't moving correctly and you get it moving better and the nervous system becomes less dysregulated. But what I learned over the years is that the thing that is constantly regulating our nervous system is our breath. In fact, when our physiological state or emotional state changes, the first thing to change is our breath. For example, if a lion walks into a room or you hear some, very surprising news, you immediately gasp. And that's a form of breathing that actually increases your sympathetic tone in your body. When you feel a sense of relief, you sigh. Without even really realizing it, what your nervous system is doing is it's regulating itself and going into a more parasympathetic state. So we're already using our breath to access certain aspects of our physiology. And so that intrigued me about breathing. Another reason I got really intrigued by breathing is my own personal experiences. Much like what you had, I had a transformational breathwork experience, and I wanted to facilitate that for more people. I also got into breathing and breathwork because of the way breathing shapes our face. My son ended up having an underdeveloped upper palate, and that resulted from dysfunctional breathing. And dysfunctional breathing in children usually results from uneducated parents, right? I was an uneducated parent who was ignorant to paying attention to the way my child was breathing, not the fact that they were just breathing, and I'm happy that they're alive, but actually paying attention to how they breathe, because just like we as adults can regulate our emotional state based on how we breathe, our children can as well. And if we're dysfunctional breathers as children or adults, we're going to have dysfunctional nervous systems, which means we're going to be easily distracted. We're going to have a hard time focusing. We're going to have a hard time, problem solving and creating and doing all the things we want to do, because our cognitive function declines when we're dysfunctional breathers, whether we have the awareness or not. So these are a handful of things that intrigued me into going down this path. And I just went in as a student, and I will say I am by no means an expert. I am a student. I'm learning new things every day. I'm practicing different strategies and modalities and ordering all kinds of different gadgets so I can learn more and hopefully, shorten the learning curve of what I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years and shorten it down to a few hours, because really, and it doesn't even have to be that long, breathing is such a simple intervention that literally you could teach somebody a variety of different breathing techniques in less than an hour that they can use and have at their disposal for the rest of their life.
Yeah, and I look forward to jumping into that. And that's what's exciting to me about functional medicine is a lot of us, we get down this path for our own journeys. We can use those then to help improve our own health or our family's health or our relatives' health. But even more importantly, then we see the power that it has when we give that out to other people. And it's really powerful in that sense. You shared in your lecture that we take over 23,000 breaths a day, yet most are unconscious. What happens physiologically if we are aware of our breath and think about that and use that to control? What happens physiologically when we take control of that?
Yeah, so one of the main things that will happen, assuming that we're slowing down the breath, because most people we find are overbreathing. The average American takes about 15 to 20 breaths per minute. And if we can get that down to, let's say, less than 10 breaths a minute, perhaps even around 6 breaths per minute, then there's dramatic changes that take place in the state of our nervous system, in the state of our metabolic system, in our oral health and immune health. These things are enhanced by slowing down our breathing. We also increase oxygenation of our tissues by slowing down our breath. So it sounds counterintuitive, But somebody who is a short, shallow breather, who's taking, let's call it 20 breaths a minute, that person is actually not clearing out the the carbon dioxide, which accumulates in the lungs. They're not clearing it out properly. So they end up having this kind of low grade fight or flight stress response going on because CO2 increases that stress response in our body. And that makes perfect sense in a survival situation. And so slowing down our breath will actually allow us to have a more complete release of CO2. It will also allow us to absorb more oxygen at the tissue level as well. And there's 20% more blood flow to the brain. So the state that we want to be in, which is more leaning towards being more parasympathetic, is what we shift into. Most people I know that I work with at least want better digestion. They want better energy. They want more focus and clarity. They want better problem-solving skills. They want better digestion. They want better sleep. They want to have a calm mood and feel relaxed and present in their body and in their environment. And all of those things predicate or dependent on the state of your nervous system, which is dependent on the state of your breathing. I'll give you an example. My wife, and she doesn't mind me sharing this, I've shared this with others, is she used to be a short, shallow breather. And so she would always have this kind of low-grade anxiety. She would have a short fuse, and it would just a certain thing would kind of push her over the edge. Me, on the other hand, I'm just very calm. It takes a lot to get me going. And what we realized in working with her is that she had a tongue tie. So she had a thickening of the frenulum underneath her tongue. So her tongue can't sit naturally at the roof of her mouth. And as a result of that, as a child, she sucked her thumb, which pushed her upper airway even further up. And, she still remained a short, shallow breather until she had her tongue tie removed. And now she can correctly rest her tongue in the correct position, feels natural, and she's more capable of taking deeper breaths. And she's breathing primarily through her nose. When somebody breathes through their mouth, they don't properly pressurize the air that they're breathing in either. So there's, mechanical, and physical properties of the air that we breathe in change when we breathe through our mouth or when we breathe through our nose. So most people we find are overbreathing. When we create awareness around our breath, the key is to slow down the breath. That puts our nervous system into a more parasympathetic state, which is where all of our healing, creativity, rejuvenation, everything that you're seeing your functional medicine practitioner for happens when we're more in that state. And so for most people, the most relaxing thing that they do is go to sleep, right? And so they're in the most parasympathetic state while they're sleeping. So if we can get more parasympathetic during the day, that's going to have a huge effect on our healing journey. And it's going to allow us to carry out all of our biological functions more effectively. So breath is that direct access point to get into.
Right. And you brought up something I didn't really think about. We talked about if we do overbreathe, because of the less oxygen we take in, it creates a further stress response. And many of us already have enough physical, emotional stress as it is. So if it's one thing that we have easy access to, that's quite amazing when you think about that. One thing you mentioned that your talk was, and I find this kind of interesting, is that if people who mouth breathe or overbreathing is the number one cause of cavities. I'd like for you to kind of unpack that a little bit, but like, what are some of the other things that are sabotaging our health when we mouth breathe when we really shouldn't be?
Yeah, great question. So I'll contrast mouth and nasal breathing, because obviously if you're not breathing through your mouth, you're breathing through your nose. So let's talk about some of the downward consequences, negative consequences of mouth breathing. So one, it is the number one cause of cavities because it dries out our saliva. When we dry out our saliva, we dry out all the protective mechanisms that saliva offers us. We also change the pH of our mouth, and we change the bacterial constitution. The oral microbiome starts changing and shifting as well. We're more likely to develop gingivitis, more likely to develop plaquing, and which is essentially tartar on our lungs, which is a biofilm that's developed by bacteria. We also may not realize this, but mouth breathing is a diuretic. So it increases the frequency of having to use the bathroom, especially while you're sleeping. So about 50% of the population breathes with their mouth open at any given time. 66% of people sleep with their mouth open at night. And so or whenever they sleep. And so the problem with that is that we're not properly oxygenating ourselves, because when we breathe through our mouth, we don't properly pressurize the air. There's 20% more pressure of the air that we breathe through our nose versus breathing through our mouth. What also happens when we breathe through our mouth is we change the bacteria. Much of the bacteria on the back of our tongue is what helps us produce nitric oxide. And so when we're mouth breathers, we also diminish the concentration of that bacteria that helps us make nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a very potent molecule in the body. It's antiviral, antibacterial, okay? So it's antipathogenic. That's why our nasal cavity is lined with mucosa that makes nitric oxide, assuming we have the right constitution of our oral microbiome, which again depends on the way we breathe. So if we're reducing nitric oxide, we're diminishing our immune function. Remember, as you said, we take 23,000 breaths a day. Hopefully the majority of those, 80% of those, are through the nose if we can help it, if we have the awareness. And when we're breathing that air in, it's our direct communication and contact with the outside world. So when we're breathing through our nose, it's not just 23,000 breaths, 30 pounds of air that our nose has to process and pressurize and moisture regulate and temperature regulate and spiralize so that it can go to the bottom of our lungs. All that happens in our nose. Our nose is the beginning of our immune system. And so that's why the nitric oxide is so important and so relevant. The other thing that happens when somebody is a mouth breather is it actually has consequences on our facial structure. So people who are mouth breathers will mean that their tongue is sitting in the bottom of their mouth, as opposed to the tongue correctly sitting in the top of the mouth. Your tongue, believe it or not, is also a postural muscle. It holds the front of your head up. And so when the tongue rests gently behind the front two teeth, the cervical extensor muscles start to relax. So somebody who has chronic neck pain, for example, this is why people with tongue ties have chronic neck pain, including my wife, because they can't get their tongue at the roof of their mouth. So their extensors stay they stay active, and so they develop chronic neck pain because of that, and it's because their tongue isn't sitting correctly. So they see the chiropractor, the physiotherapist, the massage therapist, and they can't seem to get that kink out, or it feels better and then it comes right back, and it's because their tongue isn't sitting correctly in the mouth. When your tongue sits in that position, it acts as a spacer. So if you study in many different cultures, they're still around today. But my parents grew up in a generation where they didn't use toothbrushes. They used to chew neem branches, and the oils from the neem tree would create the right, oral kind of microbiome for them. So it acted as a toothpaste and a balancer of their oral microbiome. They would bristleize the end of the brush by chewing it. So by chewing hard things, we're actually increasing the strength of our teeth and how well they're rooted into our face. Right? A lot of people develop issues when they stop chewing food, or they never chew food. Like, for example, young children, they don't really chew a lot of food these days. Most of their food is mechanically processed and pureed, and it just dissolves in their mouth, or they just drink it. So they're getting the micronutrients, but they're not getting the stimulation of the jaw that strengthens the teeth. What also happens when our tongue is correctly positioned, it acts as a spacer, pushing the upper palate forward and outward. And remember, the upper palate, the hard palate, is the floor of our sinuses. So children who have habitually keep their tongue in the bottom of their mouth, their face is going to start caving in, which is then going to create a smaller sinus passage for them, making them more prone to infections, making them more prone to allergies and seasonal issues and mucosal buildup. And they're also more likely to be mouth breathers because it's harder for them to breathe through the nose, which then leads to adenoids and tonsils becoming inflamed. So now they end up having, those type of surgeries and interventions because of the way they're dysfunctionally breathing. So these are just some of the things that can happen. So what happened with my son is he was a mouth breather. And so one of the signs of mouth breathing is drooling on your pillow. We would just think it was the cutest thing. We have tons of pictures to prove it, but that made us realize that he was sleeping with his mouth open. So if you're sleeping with your mouth open on your face like this, you're smushing the sinuses and making them smaller and smaller and smaller. So we went to get his dental appointment done. The first dental appointment, he had tons of cavities, and we couldn't figure out why, because he eats perfectly, or did at the time. And so we were kind of baffled. And the next time we went, they said, we have to pull some teeth because there's no room in his upper arch for his, or upper palate for his teeth to come in. And that's really when I started going down the structural rabbit hole. And I read James Nestor's book, Breath. And that really piqued my interest even more, because I started realizing that the way we breathe changes our facial structure, and our facial structure changes our immune health. It changes our ability to recover and rest and repair and sleep and focus, and all of those things are predicated on something as simple as placing our tongue correctly in the roof of our mouth and breathing in and out through our nose. I mean, how much simpler can it possibly get?
That's so crazy. You listed about 15 things, 20 things that the difference between nose breathing and mouth breathing does. And I don't think most people even think like that. And that's crazy. And these are some radically important things that affect our health. Do you have a funny question though for you? When you walk through a shopping mall or the airport, do you say mouth breather, nose breather? Do you do that? Do you ever look at people and do that by chance?
Well, it's really funny because you can get a window into somebody's nervous system. So they say the eyes are the window into the soul. The breath is a window into the state of somebody's nervous system. So when I look at people, I see nervous systems, right? And so one of the clues into the state of that person's nervous system is the speed at which they're moving and the speed at which they're breathing. So you can tell who's stressed out based on those two things. One of the fastest ways to, kind of get into a parasympathetic state is to slow down our movement. So sitting obviously is the slowest form of moving. It's not moving. But if we had to move, we would move slow instead of moving quickly, because that sends a message to our nervous system that I need to move. So I need to change, what I'm producing energetically, and then our breath. So you can be in any situation as cool as a cucumber, just move slow, breathe slow, and you'll be the calmest person in the room. And the calmest person in the room is the smartest person in the room, because they're accessing a different part of their brain.
That's exactly right. So it's funny. You got me thinking now, like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of guilty of this. You just got me sitting here like, oh my God, I'm getting nervous thinking about how I kind of move kind of fast. I get myself in trouble. So breathwork's really important. So many people are stuck in sympathetic drive. I mean, and I think about I'm a traditional trained pharmacist, but I think of all the patients that come in with high cholesterol, blood sugars out of control, high blood pressure. And to me, a lot of it isn't so much, it's really a function of people are just stuck in sympathetic tone, massive amounts of cortisol, massive amounts of adrenaline and those type things. And you call breathwork the fast acting adaptogen. And I recommend true adaptogens all the time. You mentioned your plant medicine connection and all that kind of stuff. Can you expand on how breath modulates the nervous system and how that compares to like a supplement or even like medications? Because to me, this is like 80-90% of the people that we see nowadays on our practice. Would like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such a wonderful topic that we can unpack for hours. So I'll try to keep it brief, because brevity is not my greatest competency. Because you can probably get a sense of the way my brain thinks, like just connecting all these different dots that seemingly may not be connected, but eventually you realize that they are. So I would say, we are in a sympathetic dominant society, right? I think that's pretty well established. And so then we have to ask ourselves, what are people so stressed out about? Because stress is actually, a lot of it is about, it starts as perception, right? It's our perception of the environment that we're in, or the situation that we're in, right? Sometimes people live in the past and they're stressed out in the present moment for something that happened in the past, or they're stressed out in the present moment for something that hasn't even happened yet. And so one of the things that brings us into that present moment is our breath. And so I always ask myself, what breath is required in this moment? So for example, if I'm going for a walk, I'll breathe a different way. If I'm sitting down to check email, I'm going to consciously breathe a different way. If I'm trying to fall asleep, I'm going to breathe a different way, right? But if I take a sleep supplement, which can be greatly beneficial, but my breathing is dysfunctional, right? I have all the nutrients, or I have all the messaging coming in from the herbs or the minerals or whatnot. I have the conditions for success, but I don't have the information that tells my cells what to do aligned for that success. So you can use both, right? Certainly if you use an adaptogen like ashwagandha and you regulate your breath, you're going to get amazing benefits. But if you never regulate your breath to match the state that you want to be in, then you're never going to utilize those supplements to their fullest potential, right? So, when we talk about the common challenges that people have, like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, poor digestion, what I tell people is, congratulations, your body is doing exactly what it's designed to do, right? If you push elevator button number 5 to go to the 5th floor, you're going to go to the 5th floor every single time. But if you're pressing that button unconsciously and not realizing that that's what's causing it, then you're going to be frustrated, or you're going to think the elevator is broken. So breath is that elevator button. So when somebody has high stress, they're generally speaking going to have high cholesterol. They're going to have high blood pressure. They're going to have poor sleep, right? They're going to have sexual dysfunction. Those are all symptoms of, not even symptoms, but byproducts of being sympathetic dominant and not being enough in a parasympathetic state. So the key is there's really like 3 things that can rapidly transform somebody's health. One is the nervous system, right? So a regulated nervous system, and breath is one of the easiest access points to the nervous system. 2 is circadian rhythm. So our relationship with the sun is absolutely crucial to our circadian biology. And 3 is rest and recovery. And most people don't have adequate rest and recovery. So our first line of defense is getting people to breathe better, get outside more, experience bright days, dark nights, and slow down their breath to regulate the nervous system and rest more. Those are things that are going to help them realign their hormonal sequences throughout the day. It's going to help them get much better recovery and sleep to restore their nervous system and their adrenals and their hormonal systems. And then if we teach people how to breathe throughout the day, they're tapping into, an immense opportunity for healing to take place. And then we also teach people how to breathe while they're sleeping, which is with their mouth closed and simply just putting a little piece of surgical tape over their lips to ensure that they're nasal breathing at night. So they're doing 8 hours of breath work without even having to lift a finger, right? Without even having to think about it. You can start doing 8 hours of breath work every night by simply reinforcing the fact that you're going to breathe through your nose while you're sleeping. And those 3 things, if we can get somebody to do those 3 things for a few days, they start seeing a huge shift in their health. But most people's circadian rhythms are dysfunctional. Most people's breathing is dysfunctional or unconscious. Okay. And they may be unconsciously competent at breathing, but each environment requires a different, potentially slightly different breath to match the needs of the environment. So think of your nervous system or your breath like a steering wheel to your nervous system, right? If the road's curving left, I'm going to turn it to the left. If it's curving right, I'm going to turn my steering wheel to the right. And that's how we want to think of our breath. And then sleep, millions upon millions of people, and you probably know this just from what's prescribed to people, have sleep issues, right? So we already know what people's lifestyle disorders are, right? Because those are the most commonly prescribed medications. And so that's what we need to teach people how to do. So it's not just breathing, it's circadian rhythm and restoration and recovery. Those are the 3 things that we find can make a huge impact on somebody's capacity and ability to heal. And so breath is one of those. And the question was, how is breath an adaptogen? So slowing down our breath shifts us more into a parasympathetic state. Speeding up our breath shifts us into a more sympathetic dominant state. And, there's physical changes that take place in the body when we breathe more and faster. And there's physiological changes that take place as well. So if you were, I like to think of breathing in 3 different gears. That keeps it easy for people to understand. So our default breathing pattern, if we can make it 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, that's going to keep us in a calm, restful state. Okay. We call that coherence breathing. 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out. It's going to feel really slow at first. And it's working when you feel like you're not breathing enough. That slight air hunger that you're experiencing is increasing your CO2 levels in a good way, because that increases oxygenation. So the higher our CO2 is, the more oxygen is dumped at the tissue. So you're actually going to get more oxygen to your brain and other tissues in your body by doing that. The next gear is, and of course, when you're breathing 6 in, 6 out, tongue is at the roof of the mouth and you're breathing in and out through your nose. The next gear of breathing would be with mild exertion. So you're still breathing in through the nose, but now you're breathing out through the mouth. And when you're breathing out through the mouth, you're doing your best to clear out all that CO2. So you're exhaling more fully and getting that air out, that CO2 air out. And then the third gear is when you're in a sprint or, a harder exertion, when you can't maintain nasal breathing anymore, then you're going to breathe in and out through your mouth. So if you were in a full sprint, you can imagine your diaphragm is moving up and down very quickly because you're breathing quickly. Your lungs are expanding and contracting very quickly. And all of this mechanistically starts squeezing the heart, right? So as the lungs expand, as the diaphragm moves up and down, so our breathing apparatus is actually assisting the heart in increasing blood pressure, therefore getting the blood to the arms and legs where you need it the most if you're running. If you're breathing slow and you're more parasympathetic, then the blood is coming in from the arms and legs and it's going to be more concentrated in the trunk. So we don't need a lot of pressure to get blood to our trunk organs, to our digestive organs, so on and so forth. So slowing down will get more blood, get us into a more parasympathetic state, lower our blood pressure naturally, lower our resting heart rate, and get that blood flowing to our trunk organs where we can digest, where we can detox, where our kidneys can do their job and filter, where our reproductive organs can do their job, as is required of them. But if our breathing is dysfunctional, then that doesn't happen quite as well.
Right. And you brought up so many of those things are powerful, have a control in our health, but even more importantly, they're free. Like that's the part to me nowadays in this world, especially this functional medicine world we live in. Everything costs a lot. Everything's cash, nothing's covered by insurance. And these are free things you can do. And to me, that's what makes breathwork so powerful. It has the ability to affect so many things, but it's free. So just to curiosity wise on that adaptogen side, you mentioned coherent breathing and stuff like that. If you had to pick one type of breathing that you find is the best for somebody that's in a horribly stressful situation and they need to calm that cortisol, bring down that sympathetic tone fast, what's your favorite type of breath work to work for that type of situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if somebody's experiencing acute stress or they had a stressful call and they don't want to bring that home with them or, vice versa, then it's called a physiologic sigh. And it's a really simple breathing technique. And you may have to do it in direct correlation to how fast you can regulate. Some people takes them a few breaths and they feel good. For some, it might be 3 to 5 minutes, but certainly that's way faster than any drug, way faster than any supplement can act, right? So it's quick acting, it's instant, it's natural, it's safe, and you can use it as often as you want. So essentially in a seated position, you don't want to do this while you're driving, but you could do it in the car. If the car is stationary, but certainly at your desk. You could even do this with clients. If you're a practitioner seeing clients, everyone could use a little bit of relaxation in their day and de-stressing. So sitting up nice and straight in a comfortable position, I find it works better with my eyes closed, taking a few cleansing breaths. A cleansing breath is breathing in, letting it all the way out, breathing in, letting it all the way out. And now tongue at the roof of the mouth, inhaling through the nose, breathing into the belly. Great. Another sip of air, tongue at the roof of the mouth, another sip of air into the chest. And just one more sip of air right into the throat. And just holding that for a few comfortable seconds. And then you're going to let it out with an audible sigh in 3, 2, 1. Letting it all the way out and repeating that. So taking another breath into the nose, in through the nose, into the belly. Okay, second stage breath into the lungs, keeping the tongue at the roof of the mouth, breathing in through the nose. And one more sip, just filling our throat up with air. Holding. Tongue staying at the roof of the mouth. And on the count of 3, we're going to drop the tongue and let the air out with an audible sigh. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So you would repeat that as often as required. And I already feel calmer, right? I already feel more relaxed. It's amazing what just a couple of minutes of breathing can do to shift our state. Now, the opposite of that would be to do something called a bellows breath, or it's also known as Bhakshrika breath. And bellows breath is also, we can also call it yogic coffee. So if somebody needs energy, let's say you have clients and you're trying to get them off caffeine, or they're just struggling with afternoon energy for whatever reason because their adrenals aren't working properly, then, or they wake up in the morning and they're just kind of dragging butt. Well, we can wake up their nervous system by using our breath as well. So in this technique, we can sit at the edge of our chair or, on the edge of our bed, and we're simply going to keep our hands to our sides like this, and then inhale sharply, and then exhale sharply. So I breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth. And in doing so, you're now going to get that activation of your lungs. Your diaphragm is going to be moving up and down with each breath, and your heart's going to just start pumping like crazy. And within just a few minutes, you're going to have your adrenaline levels up. You're going to feel awake. You're going to feel alert. And you're not going to need that cup of coffee anymore.
Cool.
So,
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that could be a great thing as an upper for people who are looking for more energy. They can use bellows breath as a technique as well.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. I know that'll be super powerful for those that are listening to use. You brought up that a third of your ADD, ADHD diagnosis you think are linked to how children breathe. Just kind of shortly, could you kind of talk in how breathing patterns can actually affect somebody's behavior and cognition?
Yeah. So breathing through the mouth decreases oxygenation of the brain compared to nasal breathing. There's about a 20% differential. So somebody who's breathing through their mouth is not going to get as much blood flow. We also decrease nitric oxide production. And nitric oxide, as I mentioned earlier, is a vasodilator. And so in order to get blood flow to the very tippy tips of our brain capillaries, we need to make sure that, we have very little friction to get there. And we want to make sure the blood vessels are dilated appropriately. However, when we breathe through our mouth, we decrease nitric oxide production. And as a result of that, our blood vessels don't fully dilate. So it becomes harder to get blood to them, nutrients to that part of our brain. We also, when we're breathing through our mouths, are going to be more sympathetic dominant. And so when we're in a sympathetic dominant state, we're going to be more in our limbic brain and our reactive part of our brain, versus when we're in a parasympathetic state, we're going to be more in our neocortex. So our distractibility is high when we're in a slightly stress leaning state, right? We're on edge from a nervous system standpoint. We don't feel safe. We don't feel grounded. But when we breathe correctly, there's a calmness in our nervous system. And what's really interesting too is that if somebody has dysfunctional breathing, the people next to them feel it, right? Because the way we breathe changes our heart field. Because with our breath, we can change our heart rate variability and our resting heart rate. So when we have a dysfunctional breather sitting next to somebody, so if I was sitting next to you and I had short, shallow breath, it'd be impossible for that not to affect you, right? Even if you couldn't hear me, right? Just energetically, I'd be in a different spot. So the way we breathe kind of changes the energy around us as well, right? The quantum field around us also changes because our heart field changes. And so for children, one of the things, here's another point, good point, is that the positioning of our tongue also affects our nervous system. So when our tongue is resting at the roof of our mouth, our nervous system feels more calm. And we know this because when children suck their thumb, that's exactly where they put it. The mother's nipple will hit the back of, where the teeth are now, and just on the front of the roof of the mouth. And when children use a pacifier, it instantly soothes them because there is a magic button there. And so by putting the front of our tongue just right behind our front teeth and laying our tongue across our mouth, breathing in slowly, at a slower pace, rather, pressurizing the air, moisture regulating the air, temperature regulating the air, all that stuff that the nose does is going to have a totally different effect on our cognitive abilities, our ability to pay attention, our ability to problem solve. So, calling somebody a mouth breather is an insult for a reason, right? It definitely affects their intellectual capacity.
Very interesting. So just kind of wrapping up, you've named so many things that if there's people out there like I have been being like, this breathwork stuff, this is hokey, this doesn't work. You've mentioned probably 50 unique physiological, metabolical things that happen in the body if we breathe properly. If somebody's like, okay, I want to kind of jump in and start taking a deeper dive in this, like, where does somebody who wants to start breathwork, where do you recommend they begin?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the first thing is probably defining breath work correctly. So many times when people think of breath work, they might think of Wim Hof, or they might think of, an experiential journey that they have to go on, kind of like what you did with me. However, I look at breath work as working on my breathing. And I actually work on my breathing thousands of times a day, probably at least several hundred, if not, over 1,000 times a day, because I'm always bringing my attention back to my breath. So even during this conversation, I'm bringing, my attention back to my breath and just checking in, probably 100 times just in this conversation, because that allows me to be more grounded, more present, and more focused, and be attentive to where I am. So I look at any time you're working on your breathing as breath work. So for me, I'm bringing my attention to it throughout the day. I also practice mouth taping at night. So that's a form of breath work that I'm getting in there, because I'm modulating my breath, which is changing the way I function and feel. And I think if somebody's first going to dive into this, there's a few places. Like certainly, I'm happy to share some resources if I may. You can go to breathworkwithsachin.com, and I've compiled a bunch of different resources, one being a guide called Breathe Like This, Not That, another being a keynote that I gave to a dental group who focuses on airways. I also have some guides from my travels with James Nestor at his retreat. I've got a guide that teaches you how to stop snoring. Snoring, we didn't even get into that, but is one of the most common breathing disorders. Okay, about 65 to 70 million people snore at night, including about 10% of them being children. So it's a huge issue, and it's a dysfunctional breathing pattern, and that can be corrected and addressed. So I would say that that Breathwork with Sachin is a great place to start. There's some great tools and resources there. I really love James Nestor's book, Breath. If you can find some video interviews of him on YouTube, he does a great job. He's a wonderful storyteller and a great source of inspiration for me. Another great book is called The Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McEwen. And for those of you that want to have experiential breathwork experiences, then there is an app called Elemental Rhythm. And I can share the link with you, Steve, so you have it. But that app allows you to, you get 30 free days to try it out. And that app will have guided experiences for you to, again, modify, manipulate, and modulate your breath to create a very predictable physiologic and emotional state.
That's awesome. Like you said, those are such valuable resources. And I know I've learned so much just talking to you. And every time I talk to you, I learn a few more things that I didn't realize. And so grateful for that. If people want to specifically, Sachin, learn more about you and your practice and what you do, where can they find that at?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So if people want to learn more about us, they can go to www.becomeproof.com. And that's our Living Proof Institute website. So they can certainly learn more about the work that we do. And breath is one of the modules that we teach in our program, and, amongst 11 other ones. And all of these modules are really fascinating, yet simple, predictable, and mostly free ways to improve your health, right? The only part that isn't free is somebody has to teach you, right? But once you learn it, it's like driving school. Once you learn it, then you're able to utilize it. And it's so simple that you could teach it to somebody else. So that's kind of the mission that we have. We believe the doctor of the future is a patient. And our goal is to teach people how to be healthy, and then they have a choice. Right now, people don't know how to be healthy, so they don't really have a say in it.
If you'd asked me if I was going to be doing a podcast on breathwork like a couple of years ago, I would have laughed. But I will just say what you've brought today is so powerful. I know our audience will love this. I appreciate your time. I could sit and talk to you for hours about breathwork, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But I really want to thank you for your time and thank you for what the valuable tools you brought to our audience today. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Steve. May I add something because I think it'll be helpful for people? So there's a muscle that I didn't talk about very much. It's called the diaphragm, which sits right underneath, just below your rib cage and separates your, visceral organs from your lungs. This is probably the most important muscle in the entire body. And, if you can't use your diaphragm for 5 minutes, you're dead. It's the only muscle that works 24/7 that we can actually control. And so your diaphragm has 3 unique things that it does. One is it helps you breathe, obviously. It's referred to as the second heart. So 40% of the heart's pressure and function comes from the diaphragm. The second thing the diaphragm does is it pumps your lymph. So some of the biggest lymph nodes in your body are underneath your diaphragm. So it helps remove waste. So people who are short, shallow breathers, they don't have as good lymphatics drainage and systems because the diaphragm isn't doing its job properly. So properly attuning that diaphragm makes a huge difference. The third thing the diaphragm does is stores our emotions. So many of us may have emotional challenges or we may have traumatic experiences. We all have our own stories. And a lot of that energy is stored in the diaphragm. So this is why a lot of people, when they go through breathwork experiences, they cry because it's that cry that they should have had 30 years ago. And that emotion was stored in the diaphragm. And the diaphragm, crying is a form of breathwork. Laughing is a form of breathwork, right? These are all different ways that we use our breath to, reset our nervous systems or to express our emotional state. And so when we clear out people's diaphragms by using the breathwork, then they start breathing better. And it completely changes the state of their nervous system moving forward. So when you go to breathwork with Sachin, I forgot to mention this, but I have a fully guided breathwork experience where you just plug in your headphones or put it on a speaker and you can do it with a group of people. And it takes you through a fully guided experience, much like the one Steve had with me.
Yeah, and that's exactly, you mentioned that, how like the diaphragm is like kind of like that storage hard drive for your moods and emotions, and it's going to be stored there till you can be there and it can affect your breathing, or you can actually allow it to release and allow for better breathing. So that's good. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you again for your time. Thank you for all you shared today. So grateful for that.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure and an honor, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Take care.
You too. Bye.